Many young children from America who were around in the late 80s will have their gaming nostalgia of the decade firmly entrenched around playing the NES. In the UK, on the other hand, there was no 83 video game crash, resulting in various different platforms flourishing for gaming throughout the entirety of the decade. Pair this with the microcomputer revolution and an amazing bedroom development scene, the nation was a hotbed for gaming diversity. Personally, my first ever gaming platform was the beastly Amstrad CPC464, a home computer format that was a hand-me-down from my uncle. The system sat in my childhood bedroom from 1989 onwards, which I continued to grow an appreciation for as I got older and older. In the early days, I would simply watch my father play games on the device, but it was not long until I knew how to boot up and load games myself. In fact, it sat in my bedroom for an occasional while right up until 2002, where it sat side by side with the likes of my Dreamcast, PS2, GameCube and Xbox. We moved house that year, but I am confident I would have probably had it in my next bedroom if my mother did not sneakily throw it out, viewing the device as literal old crap by that point. I still have memories as a teen of watching Eastern Europeans rummage through a skip outside of our London home, taking the device away. In fact, seeing them take the computer away is how I recall discovering she had binned it in the first place. But repressed memories aside, let's chat about some actual good nostalgia. The Amstrad was unique at the time, which is why it attracted such a large following. Most of its predecessors in the microcomputer market offered system hardware inside a keyboard, which would then need to be linked up to both an external tape recorder to load games and a television set to use as a monitor. The problem was that though in the 80s that many households would only own one television, so gamers would have to kick a family member off of the house's television to get to have a go at their games. The Amstrad changed all of this as it was a budget device that had a cassette loader built into its keyboard and would come with its own monitor too, which meant the father of the household could continue to watch Jim'll Fix It while others played glorious 8-bit games. The Amstrad, like many other home computer formats of the time, had an extremely large library of games that were made available on cassettes. In fact, the platform has more games available for it than even the fabled NES. Thinking about it, I was not even aware that games even existed on cartridges until the early 90s. The upside to cassettes were they were dirt cheap media to publish games on, which proved far more economical for customers than buying expensive microchips in plastic shells every bloody time they wanted to own a new game. To make this even better, you could just copy these games using tape recorders onto blank cassettes, meaning you could easily share copies of software with friends. When it comes to these cassettes, playing with an Amstrad, a chunk of time would be dedicated to waiting for these games to bloody load. This would usually take around 5 minutes. Which for an impatient small child, this often felt like a lifetime of anticipation. Although, to be fair, at least this would help build the hype before a playthrough, and the load screens would often stoke my childhood imagination further. Building up excitement and intrigue when getting ready for a play session was also often aided by staring at a game's box art, with games like Roland in the Caves offering cover artwork that certainly captivated my busy child mind. What was this strange looking picture all about? The truth was, back then, until you got the game running yourself, you never truly knew what you was going to get, which to be fair was all part of the charm of gaming back then for me. In terms of the way I controlled these games, the majority of them could be played by simply using the Amstrad keyboard. However, I could often get a better experience by plugging a joystick into the back of the device, which would be how I would get to enjoy many games on the system. Speaking of gaming so young, this was a magical time where these simplistic experiences felt like they offered a range of possibilities. Since I had never beaten a game nor ever seen someone else beat a game, I still held the belief that each tiny cassette contained infinite worlds, making each play session of these titles back then feel like almost anything could happen. As time passed and the 16-bit consoles became mainstream, my uncle purchased a Super Nintendo, which I was extremely impressed with. At 7 years old in 1993, I informed my mother that I wanted a Super Nintendo too, which she decided she would be getting me for Christmas that year. In the meantime, to tide my Nintendo fandom over though, she would buy me an NES from a neighbour, which I must admit I ended up being appalled with. While the system worked fine for me at first, and I had some fun with the 8 games I got with the system, it was not long before in most cases that I could not even get the games to work at all. Basically, upon inserting the cartridges, I would just get a white blinking screen, which I would later learn in adult life was a major fault with all systems, where 72 pin connectors inside the consoles would wear out over time. After playing the Super Nintendo and Mega Drive, nothing impressed me about the NES, and the fact that it was difficult to get games to even start only emphasised that further. So in this short time period, I found myself continuing to game a lot on the Amstrad, a platform that had always proven reliable to me. It was at this stage in my life I would also notice how much richer the colours were on the Amstrad, and although I had to wait 5 minutes to play a game, at least the system worked, which could not be said for the NES most of the time. Fast forward through time into the early 2000s, I would still be in love with gaming, and found myself collecting many old games and consoles from around boot sales. I had even cycled through about 4 NESs, all of which had the same problems as the one from my childhood, although at least I learned through the use of the internet workarounds to make these issues less annoying. Shortly after this, I would discover AVGN and other online content creators, making me realise I was not the only weirdo in the world who loved old games. However, I would identify a shocking omission from all of this great content. No one was celebrating the awesome Amstrad CPC464, and instead there was this over-obsession with the NES, the gaming platform I had shunned as a youngster. It was through this period I would learn that the NES was worshipped in the USA, and that the library of games was much deeper than I could have ever imagined. This instilled me with new appreciation for the device. That still left me questioning where my Amstrad was though, which would lead to the shocking revelation that the amazing computer was not even available stateside, and all that repetitive history about ET and their video game crash. The lack of representation in British YouTube gaming would later spawn a wave of UK content creators beginning to upload gaming content wanting to share their love for gaming and how gaming was for them growing up, leading to semi-popular shows such as Guru Larry's Games Yanks Can't Wank, where he would regularly spotlight European games. In fact, my good friend Dan from Slope's Game Room specifically started a gaming channel so that he could upload a video about his experiences growing up with an Amstrad, where he talked about the history of the Roland franchise. There were various gaming creators who felt that gaming history was being reported on from a one nation perspective. Other friends I have, such as Nostalgia Nerd, Kim Justice and Neil from RMC, all make full-time livings based off of their roots computer gaming, and I myself felt it was integral that many of my earliest uploads were about Amstrads, ZX Spectrums, etc. too. These platforms are not just important to British gaming history, but gaming history overall, as these were the sort of systems that many legends in the industry would first develop games in their bedrooms for. In fact, many of the greatest games for the Super Nintendo, Nintendo 64 and Sony PlayStation, systems I would later grow up playing, would feature many games also developed by Brits who would get good fast by utilising old school home computer formats, resulting in an almost endless list of British gaming classics. So, ladies and gentlemen, I guess this is why the Amstrad CPC464 is so important to me and why I hated the NES growing up. The Amstrad was a great part of my childhood that would influence my adulthood, that would ultimately lead to how I and many others make a living today. I hope you enjoyed this spotlight, as in future videos I'd like to cover some of the games in depth too. Comment down below what your first system was and what you thought of it both now and back then. Yeah, cheerio.